April is Donate Life Month. More than 100,000 people are on the wait list for a life-saving transplant, and more than 85% of those can be helped by a living donor. Today, we're talking about who can be a living donor and the difference you could make in someone's life. Thanks for joining us for this week's Health News You Can Use. I'm Lindsay Stish. This week, we're joined by Dr. Matthew Wilkinson, a transplant surgeon at St. Luke's Health System. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
So first of all, why is there such a big need for living organ donors?
Well, we have over 100,000 people on the wait list for organs of all types, kidneys, livers, hearts, lungs, and we really only get about 40,000 transplants done per year from deceased donors. So some of that deficit can be made up. In particular, in the case of kidneys, people may have to wait up to 10 years for a kidney, especially on the coasts, and the average lifespan once you start dialysis is only 5 years. So there's definitely people who end up dying on the wait list without ever having access to a transplant.
So what organs can a living donor give?
The two big ones that we think about are the kidney and the liver. Since you have two kidneys, you can donate one, and we know that people can live just fine with one kidney. In terms of the liver is the only organ in the body that regenerates, so we can actually take about 70% of the liver from someone who is healthy, and it will grow to the correct size in the recipient, and the donor's liver in their body will grow back to the normal size.
Wow, fascinating. So who can donate?
What we always tell people is anyone can donate. Generally, people sometimes rule themselves out. They say, oh, I have this, I have that, I'm not sure if I could. We always tell them, you don't know until you ask us. Please give us a call. We're more than happy to talk to you about whether or not you can be a donor.
Yeah, and I understand you're never too old to be a donor.
No, in fact, we did a liver transplant a few weeks ago, and the liver came out of someone who was in their 70s, working beautifully, and that patient's already out of the hospital.
Explain the process for becoming a living donor.
So for living donor, what happens is someone indicates an interest. Usually it's because they know someone or they've seen something on social media where someone says, hey, I need an organ, I need a piece of liver, I need a kidney. And so the first step is they call in and talk with an independent living donor advocate. That person generally has a background in social work, and they're really there to make sure the person understands what they're getting involved with. Do they understand the steps? Are they doing what they want to do of their own accord, things like that.
I understand you can opt out at any point.
Absolutely. This is a thing that you're doing of your own volition. People can back out from the time they call the living donor right up until they go to sleep in the operating room, and for no reason at all.
Good. So there's no pressure there.
Absolutely not, and there's no obligation. Just because you call and say, hey, this is something I might be interested in, it doesn't mean that you would have to go through the process.
Okay, good to know. So recently the federal government announced plans to overhaul the U.S. Transplant system. How could that benefit potential recipients?
So as we talked about already, we do know that there's a mismatch between the number of organs available and the number of people waiting. And so part of the goal in overhauling the system is to improve our ability to get organs from deceased donors, which is where most of them come from. And so the hope is that by overhauling that system, number one, we can get more organs, and number two, generate more equity because it's not equal across the country as to how fast the organs are allocated to people.
Okay. Now shifting a bit, are there any advancements in transplant or things that you hope to see in the future?
The two biggest limitations we always have in transplant is number of organs and the fact that because the organ came from someone else, we have to give medicines to prevent the recipient's body from rejecting that organ. And so if we could grow an organ in a lab, especially if you grew it from the person that needed it, not only would you get rid of the need to have deceased donors, but you would also be able to remove having to immunosuppress the person. And so we've been able to take cells from people, a cheek cell, a differentiated cell, and turn it back into a stem cell, and then basically turn it into kidney-type cells, so nephrons, which are the functional unit of the kidneys.
Okay.
The problem is it doesn't look like a kidney, right? It's the functional cells, but we haven't quite figured out yet how to make it look like something that you could give to me that I could then sew into somebody. And that's where a lot of our 3D modeling and matrix printing, I do think in the timeline of my career, that is something that we will see is probably 3D printed organs.
Oh, very exciting, very interesting. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I think the most important thing, especially because April is Donate Life Month, is to be an organ donor, either living or deceased donor. As we said at the beginning, you don't rule yourself out. You never know if you're a donor until someone looks at it and says, yes, you could donate.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
To learn more, visit stlukeskc.org/transplant specialist. Or to sign up to become an organ donor today, visit organdonor.gov/signup. You can also stay up to date with all the latest health news and stories from St. Luke's at stlukeskc.org/news. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time on Health News You Can Use.